Recently, there have been several news reports that Russian paramilitary organizations like the Wagner Group, also called PMC Wagner, recruit convicted criminals into their forces fighting in Ukraine. There are also some reports that Ukraine has done something similar. Of course, some people noted and/or ask if this is a return of the well-known penal units from the Red Army of the Second World War. Well, let us take a closer look. First off, a look at the initial news. On 2nd July 2022, the organization Gulago.net, an organization reporting on civil rights violations in prisons, published a statement on their Telegram page. To quote, "I bring to your attention that in the corrective labor colony IK7 Yablonovivka of the Federal Penitentiary Service in St. Petersburg and Leningrad region, the Federal Security Service is currently recruiting volunteers for Donbass among the prisoners. They are being motivated and promised freedom for participation in military operations and mine clearance and restoration of buildings on the territory of Donbass." On 4th July 2022, Important Stories, which is described by Wikipedia as an independent Russian website specializing in investigative journalism, reported on this issue as well with further information. Be aware that basically all sources are based on few interviews with relatives of convicts and one interview with a supposed member of the Wagner Group, so everything should be taken with a grain of salt. Additionally, Russian NGOs like Russia Behind Bars is also reporting on the issue. Novaya Gazeta Europe reported that Russia Behind Bars is on a list of the Ministry of Justice of the Russian Federation in the list of NGOs performing the function of a foreign agent. To simplify it a bit, such NGOs are seen by Russian authorities as organizations designed to weaken the Russian Federation and are organized or influenced by the CIA or MI6. So what follows is a structured information from those articles while noting differences and similarities to penal units of the Second World War. The first aspect we need to cover is organization, since it's probably the most important. Whereas historically they were dedicated penal units, namely the penal battalions for officers and the penal companies for NCOs and regular soldiers, it seems this time the convicts are part of paramilitary units. A supposed member of the Wagner Group specifically noted that these are not separate units such as a penal battalion. This will also make more sense once we cover the order aspect as well. The next point is recruitment. Here we have some major differences. From the information available right now, it seems the recruitment is not done directly by the organizations of the Russian Federation. It seems that mostly paramilitary organizations, particularly the Wagner Group, recruits prisoners from the various prisons. Yet according to some statements, they are escorted by FSB and Federal Penitentiary Service. People in uniform come to the colonies, employees of the regional departments of the Federal Penitentiary Service and the FSB. With them, representatives of Wagner PMC, sometimes even by helicopter. Needless to say, you can't just walk into a prison and just recruit people. The Wagner Group is quite complicated, particularly depending on who you ask. The Western media view is that it is basically an organization that helps Russia advance foreign policy. For instance, it is involved in the Syrian civil war. Additionally, it also took action in Libya, Madagascar, Mozambique, the Central African Republic, and Sudan. Meanwhile, the Russian view is basically that Wagner is just a private organization and additionally that the West is doing the same. Thank you to Andrew for further information on this. Yet this is in stark contrast to the penal units of the Red Army. These were officially created and managed by the Soviet state. They were created with Order 227 of the People's Commissariat for Defense in July 1942, generally known as the Not a Step Back Order. The order authorized the employment of criminals, both common and political, in the Red Army ranks. Be aware that there were some precursor penal units as well, but those are not really well documented. This also means the legality of recruiting prisoners is very shaky, at least according to the articles I read. Note, by legality I mean that lawyers and others noted that the existing Russian laws are rather restrictive on just transferring convicts from one prison to another, so transferring them from a prison to somewhere else is likely illegal. Most of the other aspects, like letting them fight, etc., probably as well. This is of course also due to the fact that the war in Ukraine is officially a special operation in Russia, whereas the Red Army was involved in the Great Patriotic War. Anyway, let us look at compensation. Volunteers from the prison were promised 200,000 rubles per month, which is about $3,285 and an amnesty for their crimes, which we will cover later. For reference, according to takeprofit.org, the minimum wage in Russia is $245, whereas the average wage is given with $1,001. So roughly speaking, the convicts would receive more than 3 times the average wage. Although Statista.com notes that in January 2022 the minimum wage was just $177. So 200,000 rubles is quite a lot. Be aware that several other sources only noted 100,000 rubles per month, so about $1,642, which is still 60% above the average wage. Be aware that the conversion rates changed quite a bit in the last 2 days. The article notes that if the convict dies in combat, his family would receive 5 million rubles, which would be about $83,000. But there's a catch. All information according to the article was not in writing and communicated indirectly via prison foremen as well. Historically, I'm not sure about the salary. I assume it was reduced to that of a private since everyone was demoted during his time in a penal unit. In terms of pensions, in case of death, the family received a full pension. About amnesty, here let us start with the historical penal units first. In return for performing these hazardous tasks, the NKO returned Strafniki, so soldiers serving the penal units, who were fortunate enough to survive the penal service to regular Red Army units, and noted, expiated his guilt with his own blood on their service record. According to important stories, this is quite different to the current situation. Since it is not yet possible to declare an amnesty in Russia to a group of people on the list, we are talking about a pardon given by the President of Russia. According to a source, every convict has the right to write a petition for presidential pardon. Usually it doesn't work, but in this case, PMC representatives promised that the owner of Wagner, PMC, Yevgeny Prigozhin, will personally take them to Putin. So the media reports that the promise would also include the removal of a criminal record and for those without Russian citizenship, a Russian passport. In terms of duration, the contract according to Russian news reports would be 6 months. Historically, the time in the penal units of the Red Army was very short, namely 1 to 3 months, according to several sources. Which brings us to the survival chances. My relative was told this: the Nazis are very difficult to detect there, and they are all very well trained. You will be at the forefront helping to detect the Nazis, so not everyone will return. At first they said about 20% would return, then that almost no one will return. There are various other reports. One notes that more than 90% of one group has died already. Another source notes that out of 68 prisoners, 60 died. Another source states that in one group, out of 42, only 5 had died, according to a recruiter, but he also claimed that they attacked the enemy with knives. One statement is very specific, noting that there is a 15% chance of death and 25% chance for injury. Personally, I would say all these numbers are likely complete hogwash, since A, war is generally chaos, B, keeping track of losses is not an easy process and likely is done differently depending on the units. So this is even a problem with regular militaries. Which brings us to C. In this case, we are dealing with a paramilitary organization. As such, I suspect the importance for such an organization is lower than for a regular military. D. The interests in the lives of convicts are likely extremely limited. And E. I highly suspect that the record keeping is not the best in overall and particularly not for convicts. Historically, the survival rates were rather low. On a monthly basis, the average losses of permanent cadre and Strafniki in all penal units during the year 1944 was 14,191, or 52% of the average monthly strength of 27,326 men. This grim toll was 3 to 6 times greater than the overall average monthly personal losses suffered by the regular Red Army units in offensive operations in 1944. The next aspect is selection. This is probably, besides organization, the most different one, but also linked to it. In a Red Army penal unit, there was not really a selection process, unless you consider a military tribunal as such. Meanwhile, according to several reports, the convicts must fulfill certain criteria. The people must be physically healthy and below 55 years in age. They must not have a Ukrainian passport and not be convicted for crimes against sexual integrity or drug abuse. According to various reports, murderers and robbers can join or are even encouraged. Generally, they want people with prior military or combat experience. Various reports give the numbers on how many people were finally taken. One report notes 40 out of 200. For another prison, it was 30 to 40 out of 50. Assuming that these stark differences are correct, this could indicate different selection standards, but could also reflect the overall fitness differences of the prison population depending on the region or various other factors. Be aware this is in contrast to what Moscow Times reported in July. It noted, prisoners with combat experience across Russia are being recruited en masse to fight in Ukraine. The Gulago.net prisoners' rights group has reported. Of course, it is debatable what en masse means, but for me that would mean that most of the selection process, and particularly the polygraph test, would not happen. Media Zona and Important Stories have some more information on the tests. Those who agreed to fight in Ukraine were to pass a scrutinizing screening, an interview, physical examinations, then a document inspection and a polygraph test, which was to determine the inmate's inclination to desert, to using drugs, and if he was capable of murder. If the convict passes the polygraph, in 2 weeks he was sent to participate in military exercises. Next, we look at the roles these men would perform. As previously quoted, one person stated, "My relative was told this, the Nazis are very difficult to detect there and they are all very well trained. You will be at the forefront, helping to detect the Nazis, so not everyone will return." If this is correct, this would be rather similar to the employment of Strafniki, which was the name for members of the penal units in the Second World War. To quote Glantz, "With regard to the complete employment as Stalin demanded, most fronts and armies employed their penal subunits to perform the most harrowing missions in their most dangerous sectors. This involved conducting assaults against fortified positions, attacking bypass strongpoints, and manually clearing minefields before and during offensive operations." There are some other statements that note that the paramilitary units don't need cannon fodder and that the regular members of the organization actually go first in themselves and that the convicts follow. As a response to this statement, another person in the same article noted that the convicts are mostly trained for assault and mine clearing. Several times it is noted that the convicts are only recruited to the infantry since the paramilitary groups have enough specialists. This would not surprise me since in wars infantry is doing most of the dying, which was generally a problem. As such, this is mostly in line with historical penal units. Before we look at the summary and final comparison, we also must take a short look at Ukraine. Since shortly after the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Ukraine's president in February 2022 authorized the release of convicts with combat experience to join the fight against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There is some reporting of this, but from what I have seen, it mostly shows up on the outlets that are either on the far left or far right. In one instance, I looked at a far left news site that referred to an intermediate website as a source, so I looked at the source on this website, which gave a far right journalist and politician as a source. Due to the language barrier and the fact that sources seems to be mostly on the fringes of the political spectrums, I did not pursue this trail further. The main difference to Russia is that for Ukraine this is a war and a defensive war as such, whereas Russia, as of writing of the script 23rd August 2022, it is just a special military operation, so not a full-blown war. In short, there are far more differences than similarities. The similarities are as follows, assuming the information from the articles is correct. The survival chances in both cases are low. In terms of roles, the convicts will be used as regular and or assault infantry, likely also mine clearing, so very similar to the historical penal units. Another similarity could be the Amnesty, but this is quite complicated due to the legal framework. In terms of differences, the following aspects differ. The organization. While penal units in Red Army were dedicated units with its own staff and mostly consist of convicts, nowadays the convicts are part of regular paramilitary units. This is also another aspect. It seems the convicts are not used in regular armed forces. In terms of legality, while Order 227, better known as the No Step Back Order, was probably as official as it gets, the legality of sending prisoners from the federal Russian prison system to the front lines under the command of paramilitary units seems to be anything but official. Similarly, there seems to be nothing in writing so far as well. Another major difference is the selection, whereas in the Red Army various infractions could lead to being sent to a penal unit. Nowadays the convicts are selected and tested for reliability and physical fitness, although the latter would mostly have been not an issue in the Red Army since most were already members of the Red Army and previously screened. In terms of duration, serving in a penal unit was 1 to 3 months, whereas nowadays convicts are told that the duration is 6 months. In short, there are currently no Russian penal units from my understanding. Additionally, I assume this won't change unless the Russian Federation fully mobilizes. In that case, we could see a return of separate penal units, although even that is doubtful. Big thank you here to Aktenfresser for making a summary tweet thread on this. Thank you to Andrew for viewing the script and providing valuable feedback. Special thanks to all my supporters for making trips to museums and military archives possible. As always, sources are listed in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.